When you retire, you may get a chance to go to football heaven. This is football heaven.
Hello and welcome to The Mission. I'm your host, Jameer Howerton. The Pro Football Hall of Fame is gearing up for the annual Black College Football Hall of Fame Classic, the Battle of the Tigers, where Grambling State will take on Tennessee State right here at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium on Labor Day weekend. Now, in association with celebrating the excellence of this year's Black College Football Hall of Fame class, who are some of the mighty men that have been a part of building this game that we all love and adore through the HBCUs and to go on to play at the next level at the NFL. Today, I'm super pumped to be joined by the author of In Bounds, the evolution of historical Black college players in professional football. Mr. Ricky Clemons is joining us right after this break.
Tyler.
Yes.
David Baker from the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Oh my gosh.
Both the 2020 and 2021 enshrinements this August will make for the best class ever. Go online now to get your Hall of Fame exclusive enshrinement gear at profootballhof.com.
See you in Canton for twice the fun in 21.
Come out and experience one of the most cultural events in Canton, Ohio on Labor Day weekend, the Black College Football Hall of Fame Classic. Don't miss the opportunity to serve the community, enjoy great food, live music, dancing, battle of the bands, and amazing football game. Visit profootballhof.com for all your ticket information. Welcome back to The Mission. I am super pumped to be joined by Mr. Ricky Clemons, the author of In Bounds. But, you know, before I give him his welcome and give him his flowers, because as you heard in the intro, I need to really let you guys understand that this book is all about the documentation of breaking barriers. And when you think of breaking barriers, the man that wrote this book, let me be clear, he is the first African-American sports information director at the Sports Festival Games and to become one of the first African-Americans as a business and international public relations manager in Major Baseball League. All of our listeners and viewers know here at The Mission, we're all about talking to the first of the first. When we heard from Artis Stevenson, who was the first president of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America. With that being said, I want to welcome Mr. Ricky Clemons to The Mission. Welcome, sir.
Thanks very much, Jameer. Thanks for having me. I'm certainly going to enjoy this. Thank you so much for your time.
Ricky, I am so pumped that I'm on 10, as you can hear. You know, when I think of this book, In Bounds, before we dive in and talk about the rich history, let's break down the title. Because I have my own understanding, but I want to hear from the author himself. Why did you title it In Bounds?
Well, you know, Jameer, you mentioned early in the opening about breaking barriers. And I've been a barrier breaker almost all of my career, you know, luckily. I broke barriers at Major League Baseball. I broke barriers at the Olympic Committee. I broke barriers in corporate America. But as I was doing the research for this particular book, I realized that we as Black players have been involved with football since the very beginning. I mean, the first player was in 1902, Charles Follis with the Shelby Athletic Club. So as I was doing my research, I realized that we were never out of bounds or on the sidelines. It's normally what our books are about, you know, on the sidelines trying to get in. No, we were always in this game from the very beginning. So I decided to name the book In Bounds because we've been in bounds for a long time.
And you know what? That is the exact way I received it on my mother's soul. I was like, you know what? If just reading and learning the story about you and your best friend and what motivated, you know, him to call you and say, hey, Ricky, you need to get this done. I was like, you know what? For most of our careers in general, it's been, like you said, out of bounds. But it's in bounds because it's in the field of play. Because when you think of out of bounds, it's out of the field of play. And these great men that you documented in this book, and where the Black College Football Hall of Fame Classic is, and where the Black College Football Hall of Fame Classic is housed right here in Canton, Ohio, no, it's definitely inbound. So thank you for that. Thank you so much. And also too, the dedication warmed my heart, because before you got to mom and dad, you talked about your grandmothers. And I'm a mama's boy. I got it tattooed on my arm through and through, and it was nothing like my grandmother's. And I think of the apple pie, the pound cake, and the macaroni and cheese and fried chicken, and the love that I got from my grandmothers. You dedicated first and foremost of mentioning your grandmothers in the book. Talk about that.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna bring me to tears here, Jameer. But you know, I was lucky enough to be raised by my two grandmothers. It was a what I call the golden triangle. My two grandmothers and my mother, and they together raised me. My mother lived in New York, but I spent all my school days in North Carolina with my grandmothers, and they were my rock. So they were the beginning of everything I've ever done.
Wow. Wow. And also too, in that quote of breaking barriers, you mentioned Sam Lacey, Rick Robbins, Lou Martin, and On-Field Dukes. Talk about these great men, because you mentioned how you stand on the shoulders of them when going through the process of writing this book, but not only that, over the course of your career of breaking barriers.
Now, that first person, Sam Lacey, as you well know, is a Hall of Fame sports writer from Major League Baseball. He was the editor of the Afro-American for many years. He was my mentor. And Sam actually wrote his last column at 99 before he passed. I mean, he kept writing all the way to the end. He covered all of Joe Louis's fights. He traveled with Jackie Robinson. He was there at the early Olympic Games. So he was my hero. And when I got the opportunity to go to Major League Baseball, I called Sam and said, Sam, you know, the people from Major League Baseball have just called me. They want me to come up and work there, but I don't really want to leave DC. Sam said, Ricky, what's your address? I told him my address. He said, I'm coming over and breaking your arm. I'm like, what? He said, no, if you don't take the job, I'm coming over to your house. I'm actually going to break your arm. I'm like, no. He said, because you don't really know how important this position is, how we tried so many years just to have a meeting in the front office of Major League Baseball in order to break barriers. And now you're going to be a part of that. You have to go. So Sam was the guy that really helped me to make that deal. Ofield Dukes, as most of us from Howard University who've been around DC and in PR, he was the dean of all the PR folks. He wanted me to get into politics, but of course I didn't like politics. I enjoyed sports, but he was certainly my mentor also. So those people are all the people that meant a lot to me to help me, because I'm standing on the shoulders of all those people, believe me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's dive in and talk about Inbounds.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that just attracted me was the opening essays. And if you could just really dive in for people that may not know, but let's talk about your friend, Mr. B, and how that conversation came about. But more importantly, the relationship. You know, I really want to dive into that relationship that you have with your best friend, that why he chose you and why he called you out and why the Spirit of the Lord touched him to call you and to motivate you to putting this together.
You know something? I'm still trying to figure it out, Jameer. I'm like, when he called me, I was, as I mentioned in the book, I was driving down to Greensboro to teach at A&T. And, you know, we usually call me and we all usually talk business about different opportunities and things we could do together, to make money. And he said, well, look, I got an idea for you. I said, well, you know, what is it? I thought we was talking about a business deal. He said, no, I need you to write a book. I'm like, wait a minute now, did you call the wrong number? I hadn't never written a book before. I mean, yeah, this is Ricky Clemons here. He said, no, you are perfect to write this book. I said, all right, so what's the book about? He said, well, the book is about he said, there needs to be a book about Black college players in the NFL. I'm like, whoa, you're right. There needs to be a book about Black college players in the NFL, and you should do it. He said, no, you're gonna do it. I'm like, no. I was like, why me? He said, you missed the sport. There's no one else I can think to do better than you. And of course, he's a master salesman. And at the time, I'm working on my own projects. And I did not want to do something that somebody else's idea. I had my own ideas I wanted to work on. But that stuck with me, Jameer. It really stuck with me about this idea. It was an incredible idea, incredible situation. So I had to take it on. So I started the research kind of like really on the DL. I didn't let them know I was doing it. I just kind of started the research. I had students kind of start working on some of the bios and stuff at A&T, and he would call me and just be hassling me. How you doing with the book? What's going on? And I would be getting mad, like, man, forget your idea. I'm doing my own thing. But at the same time, I was still doing the book. So finally, I decided, you know something, I'm gonna finish this book because it's a very good idea. The concept is incredible. And I've done, I've gone, at least half the way with the research. So let me just go ahead and take it to the next level. And so I just really started to put it together. And what the real key was, and I cut my cable off last summer, buried myself in my basement, did not come out till I finished that book. I only had digital TV for the entire summer. That was it.
I don't know how you did it.
No cable.
No cable.
No cable.
And
Yep.
you locked down. You locked
down.
in.
Yep.
And the artwork is amazing. The artwork. I mean, the artwork is just phenomenal. Talk about the artist, because not only do you have the great, the documentation of the forefathers, African-American forefathers that really kicked this game off. And you mentioned one of them, Charles Wallace, and we'll go back to him. But I really want to dive into your partner, Mr. John Dupree, who was the artist, and how that all came about, and why did you want to have that artwork within, chronicalizing the book, if you will? Because I look at here, Elvin Bethea.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the way, you actually have the artwork along with the breakdown of the players in here. So it's not just a reference book, but it's also, I'm a kid that grew up, it was like my father would say, read the book. But as a kid, I'm like, okay, Dad, I'm gonna read the book, but I'll go to all the pages and I want to look at all the pretty pictures. Talk about that. Talk about Mr. Dupree.
I tell you, I have been in the production business of putting together sports media guides basically all of my adult life. I basically, when I was SID at Howard back in the 80s, we had to produce a media guide for every sport. Now that's going out the window now because everything is online now.
Right.
But we actually had to produce a media guide every year for football, for basketball, for all the sports. So I really have produced probably 50 to 60 publications in my day. The very first publication that some friends of mine put together at University of Maryland was a Black yearbook. It was called the Ebony Spotlight because we felt we were not represented in the yearbook of the university. So a bunch of my friends, me and Bruce Branch and Kim Brown, who are all journalism students, we put together a Black yearbook called the Ebony Spotlight. So I've been in the production business for a long time, just producing books. And John Dupree is my homeboy from Durham, North Carolina, even though he lives now in Greenville. But he went to high school with me. He was in my high school class, and he was always an artist, even though he was in high school. But later on in life, we connected at Howard because he was a student at Howard and also a football athlete at Howard. And he was still kind of hanging around Howard or the university when I took over as SID back in the 80s. So I would have him to definitely draw my cover shot. He would do my cover for me.
Okay.
And he would do some incredible designs. Like one of the covers he did for me won the first publication contest ever by HBCU. I actually won a production contest with the COSIDA convention for second place for the best spring sports guide. And the reason why that spring sports guide was so great because John had the bison playing tennis, had the bison running track, had the bison doing all the outdoor sports, and it was just a beautiful guide, and I won a publication award for that. Wow. So as I was working on this book, I realized that I needed some art, because art brings you to the book.
Right.
And I couldn't afford to pay for the photographs. I didn't want to go out and obtain the photographs, go through some agency to do some, because this is all on my dime here. So I said, now what's the best way to get a rendition of that? John Dupree. Jameer, he is the only person I've ever looked up on Facebook. And my son helped me do that. I look, I need to look up this guy. And I found him on Facebook. He finally called me. he was in Greensboro, Greenville. I had him meet me down in Durham, which is my home. And I said, John, this is my idea. I need you to take these images. I need you to do these images of these players. And he did a fantastic job, as you can see.
Absolutely.
But it didn't stop there. After he finished that, in the mode of Ernie Barnes, who I mentioned in the book, also my homeboy, I met him when he was an Olympic artist in '84. And he went to my high school. We had the same mentor, Russell Blunt. Also, John Duper has the same mentor, Russell Blunt. He's a football coach at Howard, at Hillside in Durham. And I decided that I needed some action shots in order to kind of fill the book in. Kind of like the book that Ernie did called From Past to Palettes, where he put a lot of his artwork in the book, and then he put all his sketches throughout the book to kind of fill it in. So I stole that concept from Ernie. So I said, John, I need you to do me about maybe 10 or 12 action shots. So he went back and did those action pieces. So I had my designer to just filter the artwork into the book. And there you go.
Wow. I mean, he has portraits, Mr. Robert Brazil. I mean, great guy, Pro Football Hall of Famer. He comes around a lot. Tennessee State alum. And it's just amazing that, I know these guys are super pumped. Have you had the opportunity to speak to some of the men that you got a chance to document and they saw the pictures and just read the information and looked through the book? What was that feedback like?
Oh my gosh. I went to the Black College Football Hall of Fame dinner. I think you were in Atlanta,
I was in Atlanta around the same time. We actually got a chance to sit down a few guys that Friday, but then we had to get out Saturday. Right. But you were at the dinner on Saturday.
I was at the dinner on Saturday, and I basically provided 51 books to the association to give to the honorees and the Hall of Famers. And when I got to the reception, not knowing who got the book and when, I'm actually in line, to get a beverage. And I'm talking to another friend who says, hey, Ricky, how you doing? And Ed Too Tall Jones turns around and says, hey, I like that book. I'm like, whoo, amazing. And then I got a chance to meet Mel Blunt. Of course, Mel's image is incredible in here.
Oh, it's crazy.
The way he did Mel's piece.
Yes.
So Mel said, Ricky, I don't just want a book. I need you to sign this book for me. So Mel had me sign his book. So it was a great experience. Of course, the first people, look at that. I mean, he got Mel to the
Stinson ain't got nothing on this man right here. This is, I mean, a good all-American cowboy.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
And that's exactly how he looked at the dinner too.
Yes, he did. And he always wears his hat. Oh, yes.
So that was truly amazing. And it's some really good work. And I tell you, I did get this book to NFL headquarters.
Okay.
Troy Vincent has a copy of the book. He loves it. He calls me and he supports the book. He says the commissioner has a copy of it. And so I think it's gone to the highest heights. So, but when I talked to John, I said, John, this is the deal. I know the book is now at the front office at National Football League, but I can see them calling you, not even calling me. Because when you look at his work, there's somebody should be working for the NFL. Okay, I said, John, you're gonna get a call from NFL, man. I mean, you know what I mean? Because
to be commissioned I mean, he's gonna be commissioned to paint something or draw something. I mean, the work is amazing, and that's just great. So looking back at this labor of love, are you happy that Mr. B called you and you were able to get this done?
Yes and no. Yes, I am. But the project that I was working on, I still haven't finished yet. That's the problem. Jameer, my career has been totally incredible when it comes to sports. I mean, you're looking at a guy who worked for 3 people who are in the Hall of Fame. And, I may get emotional when I talk about this because this is really incredible. When I was a little kid in Durham, I was the ball boy gopher for Leroy Walker and all the great track meets he held at Central. He's in the Hall of Fame. My high school coach I just mentioned, Russell Blunt, started the Durham Striders. He's in the Hall of Fame. He was my mentor. I was his right-hand man. And the third person, and the reason why I was objecting doing the project, was Coach John McClendon. John McClendon was my good friend. I was his ball boy. He had a camp every year at Central. He was Central coach. I would go to the camp every year. I'd run all his errands and everything. When I became an adult, I realized that these three men were all in the Hall of Fame in some category. And I worked for all these three guys. So I was destined to do something in sports for sure.
You know, this conversation is a little deeper and it hits home for me because when I hear that word ball boy, you know, I look back at 28 years, you know, Ricky, and I follow the same suit. I had a chance to work with, you know, for two storied franchise teams with the New York Jets and the Cleveland Browns. And the little kid from Bayshore, Long Island, who started out as a ball boy in that New York Jets locker room at Hempstead, New York, to make its way to Cleveland, Ohio, to finally be 28 years later and spent 5 years here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Sometimes I pinch myself and it's just very unreal. So when I hear your story, I look up to men like you because you paved the way for guys like me.
Well, I'm proud to be here.
You know
You're part of it, believe me.
You paved the way for little guys like me to open up that door. Then I can say, I'm 50 years old. I spent 28 years in this league. And I look at men like you and say, thank you.
Well, hey, you're certainly welcome.
Thank
I
you.
tell you, it was amazing. When I was in the 8th grade, I was like the ball boy for our junior high school team.
Yeah.
After I was in the 7th grade. And what really helped me more than anything else was I got a letter for that.
Right.
And when they called my name and gave me a letter, I became the most popular student on campus.
When Mike, God bless him.
Exactly. You know, I was so popular, it was incredible.
Yeah.
All because I was the only 7th grader to get a letter.
Right.
I was the ball boy for the team.
I was the ball boy for the Jets. I was like, look, I got it. I have my summer job. It was just so amazing to me. Yes, yes, sir. And the
We got to get involved. You know, I teach, as you well know, I teach at Howard and I teach sports management, sports marketing, sports and media, and facilities and event management. And I run the internship program. And my advice to students is get involved as soon as you can, because everything starts at the bottom.
That's right.
I mean, you can't start at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I can tell you that. You know, you got to start as a ball boy first.
That's
you know
right.
What I mean?
That's right.
You got to get involved because, you know, everybody, and when you meet people in sports, you realize that everybody paid their dues.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And we are inbounds. So where can people get the book, sir?
Well, you can pick up the book on my website, which is www.hbcunflplayers.com. You can order the book there. And then secondly, you can pick it up at Barnes & Noble pretty soon. You'll be able to get it on Barnes & Noble.
Great. Well, let's talk some shop, Ricky, because I really want to dive in because, you know, in this book, when you think of the great people such as Jerry Rice, Walter Payton, Shannon Sharp, Michael Strahan, Willie Lanier, and as we talked about, Mel Blount, game recognizes game. These guys could have played on the moon. You know, NFL scouts were going to find them regardless. But what can, you know, because it's unfortunate that you look at this year's draft and Pro Football Hall of Famer Deion Sanders was very outspoken about this, that there were no players from the HBCUs drafted. What can the NFL do better, in your opinion, to start to kind of build that bridge, if you will, and to get more of the HBCU players going to the next level?
Well, you know, this has been well discussed since the draft, as you well know. This is definitely a really important subject. One thing I would say is the NFL has to recognize, because I think they've done a good job in a lot of ways of recognizing the input and certainly the what HBCU players have brought to the league. And this book really, you know, brings it home. But when you look at the players you just mentioned, those Hall of Fame players, those guys changed the game. I mean, the HBCU players changed football for the better. Because in fact, if it wasn't for HBCU players being drafted to the AFL, there would never been a merger. It was the whole deal. I mean, we changed the game. Now, when you think about people like Mel Blount, he changed the whole defensive back position.
Absolutely.
You think about guys like Winston Hill and people like that. These were the people who changed the whole defensive line position. People like Will Lanier changed the linebacker position forever. So the Black players from HBCU's impact has been tremendous in the NFL. And this is really just the beginning, Jameer. I'm hoping and planning to do 2.0, because Inbounds 2.0 is going to bring even more stories to light. What I'm talking about are the highlights of these HBCU players in NFL, their career highlights, their records in NFL, how they made a difference in the NFL, how they changed. There was one game that I hope to highlight. It was the Super Bowl game between the Jets and I think the Colts, where there were like 13 HBCU players in that game. Okay? I mean, we need to talk about that history. And I think the NFL, as great as it is and much work that they do, they need to just recognize those programs more. And here's what I think should happen. They claim that the training and some of the resources and some of the techniques are not there. Well, why not invite the HBCU coaches to the NFL training camps so they can pick up the skills and stuff that they know they need to run. So when they go back, they can teach their kids that. The same thing they teach at Alabama and USC. So that was one time, many years ago, that we did have Black college coaches at NFL training camps. They were invited. That program is gone. We need to reinstitute that program. So there's no excuse for a scouted HBCU player to not have all those 5 tools that he's going to be looking for as a scout.
You said something there, and I want to tap into that. Alabama, LSU, Clemson, the Ohio State. When you look at a 5-star athlete and the coach from Ohio State or Nick Saban comes to a young 5-star African-American's home to recruit him, how do you get that 5-star athlete to say Howard, Hampton, Bethune-Cookman, if you will, instead of going to Alabama or LSU? How do you get that? Because we're starting to see now Deion Sanders and Eddie George and their celebrity, and there are a host of other former NFL players that are coaching as well that may not get the notoriety as those two. But how do you recruit a 5-star athlete and say, hey, listen, come over here and play at Howard University, opposed to when Nick Saban comes to your door and this kid wants to go to the next level and go to the NFL, but it's that pull and tug. How do you get him to go to an HBCU?
Well, one word: resources. The reason why a Nick Saban can come in and take a 5-star athlete away from an HBCU is the facilities. When you look at the facilities, there's no match. I mean, these people have a football building, okay, where in most HBCUs, we are sharing the football facility with 16 other sports. That doesn't happen at Alabama. Right. Football is totally in another building. Nobody messes with that. You know what I mean? Nobody does that. So it has to be resources. And the next one is exposure. If I'm a 5-star athlete, if we're not on television, I got an issue. I mean, so why are we not on TV? I mean, my career as an SID at Howard started in 1980. We were broadcasting games on our own radio station and TV station back in 1980. We don't even do that anymore. That's just crazy. And Howard University has its own TV station and its own radio station. And we don't even broadcast our own games except for homecoming. So how can somebody else expect to expose you when you don't expose yourself? So there's no secret what happens. I'm at the University of Maryland, and I've been SID at Howard. At Howard, we had to work on getting the games televised and hope they got on. At Maryland, we know they're going to be on. Just turn the TV on. So, I mean, here we got to figure out how to get the games on. And we know we're going to be playing the games. And here we have not figured out yet we're going to get the games on. That's just crazy. And, right. And why we have to go and rebuild this ship every time when all they do at Alabama, you'll see is add on. Where at Howard, I mean, when I was at SID there, like I said, we had radio and TV. We built that whole thing. Now those blocks are gone and that got to be started again. We don't even have it. So you have to give the resources. I mean, but on the other hand, culturally, a lot of students are coming back to HBCUs because they feel though they're only being used by these universities. When it comes time to get employed by these universities or get a job or get a coaching job at these universities, guess who's coming back to HBCUs? Those guys who at these white schools. And that's fair and unfair. I mean, you can say what you want, but why can't you get a job at the HBCU, that places you went to school at? It happened to me. Believe me, I got my career, I was trained, got my degree at University of Maryland. Maryland wouldn't have any parts of me working there. That's why I had my career, started my career at Howard University. Because when I first started my career, there were no Blacks in sports administration, very few in 1973, 77 when I graduated. So when I applied to apply my craft at Maryland, even though I had graduated from Maryland, they did not want me nowhere in there except on the field. So I went over to Howard, became SID, and been there ever since. Now I hate to say that, but that's how it goes.
Report the facts and you have to respect the truth, period. And yeah, when you look at HBCUs, like you said, as far as the resources concerned, but there is a strong emphasis on you will go to the next level in some type of capacity, but you will come out of here with a strong academic presence within your diploma, and you will know your craft, if you will.
That's true. And now, if you're good, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
I mean, they're gonna find you. I
Right.
mean, we've had in this book here, there's at least about 20 players from Howard that made it to the pros. I mean, we don't have a lot,
Right.
but we will have some. But the key is resources and exposure. We have to be on TV. I mean, I remember when BET started doing Black College games, and the athletic directors of the conferences were rejecting that. When BET first started doing the games for free, they didn't want them to do the games.
Wow.
Now, when the ESPN comes in years later, and I give them a few dollars for the game, everybody jumps on it. But BET was doing games, Charlie Neal doing games for years.
I think it was Rocket Ishmael, if
Right.
I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he was the color analyst. I'm not for sure who the
BET was doing games every Saturday.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. Yes.
When they came to the athletic directors and said, look, we want to put your games on, when they first started, their first telecast was taping games on Saturday and then re-showing them the next Saturday at midnight. And some of the Black colleges didn't go for that. And they had nothing at the time, zero exposure, and they refused to work with Bob Johnson at that time. It was crazy.
How do you feel about Sanders and George in their positions as head coaches? And what do you hope to see from Jackson and Tennessee?
Well,
Tennessee.
let me say this. They're going to find out that coaching in these areas is a little harder than they thought, because these guys know what they're doing. These are some very good coaches in the HBCU system. They know their deal. As you can see, Alabama State won the SWAC this year. Everyone thought Jackson State was going to win it. That didn't happen, okay? So what they have to do is get into our culture and learn it. Because what I've seen, being at the HBCU for most of my careers, they have brought in these coaches from the outside who thought they're going to come to the HBCUs and revolutionize the HBCUs, get their butts whooped. And then they end up going back to where they came from, because it's a different blend and it's a different way. So I wish them success, but they're going to have to get used to the culture. The culture is a lot different than where they came from. And also they got to respect the coaches who are there, because those people have been in the trenches for years and they know what they're doing.
Absolutely. I want to go back to a name that you mentioned early in our conversation, Charles Wallace. Here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame with our education department, they speak of Charles Wallace all the time. I had the opportunity of talking to a historian and the director of the Black Cyclone, the story of Charles Wallace, Mr. Jim Stoner. And it was just very insightful. And it's just like the story of Branch Rickey, I think it's not told. It's kind of like, well, you later learn about Branch Rickey, breaking the color barrier in the Major Baseball League with Jackie Robinson. But no one really knows that Branch Rickey was actually a teammate of Charles Wallace, and he was actually Charles's kind of like protector, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of like, like when they went to the unfortunate hotels that it was segregated, and Mr. Rickey had to step up and say, hey, listen, he's going to stay with me.
Exactly.
And having the opportunity to really learn from Mr. Stoner and hear those rich stories of Branch Ricky's grandson was just amazing. Some of the stories that he passed along to him. And it brings you to tears to, back then, he told one story that they went to a hotel and Branch Rickey had to step up for Charles. And he told Charles to go upstairs to his room. Branch Rickey took care of everything. He went up to his room and he got to his room and he saw Charles like trying to almost wipe the black off of his hands. And you could just see him break down. And he had that moment of like, why can't they just take me as a player? I play just as tough. I'm the best on the team. Why can't they just see me as a player? And why does it have to be about this? And he's just frustrated. And just to hear that story was just life-changing, mesmerizing, and it brought you to an understanding of like, wow, now we see what Branch Rickey was doing with Jackie Robinson, because Jackie Robinson is almost in the image and likeness of Charles Wallace. Because here's a guy who really was talented, but there was probably players that were a little better than him, but he had the mental fortitude to be able to deal with what was coming down the turnpike, if you will.
No
and
question.
deal with all that. And then you see the other players that followed Charles Wallace and that temperament and being the first of the first was like with Fritz Pollard and so many other the great names that are there and that you do a great job here in this book. This is Black history. This is American history.
Oh, no question about it.
And it's just amazing. It's amazing about the story of Charles that is just so undertold and that a lot of people really just don't know. They really just don't know.
Jamil, you hit the nail on the head on why this book is so important. Because the names of the people we know will be brought out. But here we'll bring out the names of people we do not know. And Charles was the first Black player to ever get paid to play football, professional football. I mean, so, he's a historian himself. But he was joined by so many other great people. And this is why I found it so important to write this essay, because the book is really about HBCU players that went to the NFL. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't start with that because the first player did not enter the NFL from HBCU to 1949. So it would have been not a good idea to write a book that starts in 1949. So I had to bring the history up to the 1949 period. And so I wanted to bring out the names of people that we just didn't know. And then also the importance of how we kept playing football even when we were locked out. I mean, even though in 1933,
a 12, 13 year,
we started our own leagues and we kept playing. And I have listed a bunch of the players' names who played during that period that kept football alive, not only professionally, but in our community. And if they had not kept football alive during that period between 1933 and 1945, it would have been no way Blacks would be able to join the leagues in 1945. So this is why it's important that I wrote this essay to bring those names out. And also, a lot of people didn't know that we had professional Black football teams like the Brown Bombers and other teams that tried to keep playing football and kept going because they loved the game. And here's the killer. When I did my research on the very beginning, 1902 to 1933, what I realized was, going back to the title of the book, we were in bounds. We were playing side by side with white players from 1902 to 1933. And there was plenty of players, at least you saw the chronology here. Yep. There at least about 20 players plus they played in pro football during that period. And all of them were contributing and good players. But then in 33, of course, they cut us off. But this is a story about those people. And then in 1933, we started our own thing. And then how we got to the point where we finally got in. And this is where the rubber really meets the road. I mean, this is where LA, and I love LA, and I love the LA Coliseum because I worked at LA Coliseum during the '84 Olympics as the venue press chief for boxing and track and field. And I didn't realize that this location, as historic as it is in all sports history, was also important to this book here and for the entrance of Black players in pro football. Because if it wasn't for the AFL and the NFL getting ready to merge because of Black players from HBCUs going to the AFL, they merged, and then they wanted to open a franchise in LA. LA said, no way, unless you break down that color barrier. And that's how that color barrier was broken down. So it's so amazing, the story. This is the truth of what really happened. And some of the owners and some of the folks that's still in base football today were a part of that group that kept players out. There are a lot of excuses. People like to blame it on Calvin Griffin, but there are some team owners that are still around today who own teams that were part of that mission to keep players out. And they claimed it was not a written rule, but it was just as good as an unwritten rule because it happened, and some players even tried to stash us away to keep us until there was a integration. That didn't work, and speaking of some of the great players, if we had been fair and equitable, Jackie Robinson would have never been a baseball player. Possibly Paul Robeson may not have ever been a big star, because these guys played professional baseball before they couldn't play anymore. Jackie Robinson was a minor league baseball player. He was in the league. So was Paul Robeson. They were playing baseball, but they realized what was going on. Like, let me move on. But Jackie was in baseball.
Guys, I told you this conversation was going to be interesting and extremely informative, and as always, awesome. I'm just blown away. I'm blown away. Inbounds, where you can get the book. We talked about it earlier. Before we let you go, how proud are you to know that the Black College Football Hall of Fame legacy is being preserved right here in Canton, Ohio, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
That is tremendous. That's what you call recognition and duly noted. What you guys have done at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and certainly in partnership with Doug and Shaq with the Black College Football Hall of Fame group, is just amazing. I hope to be there for the weekend to enjoy it, to be a part of it, because it's huge. I love coming to Canton. I've been there before. And I love doing anything to work with Shaq and Doug. And as I mentioned before, I got a chance, things happen for a reason, Jameer. About, the year that we had the Super Bowl in Miami when Lovey was versus Tony Dungy, what year that was? I think it was a 94, whatever year it was. I'm getting old now. But that year was the year that we published a book through ESPN called Third and a Mile. And it's the book about the Black quarterbacks. And as a PR person, I was hired by ESPN to do the PR for that book. So I ended up lucky enough to travel and do a book tour with Doug Williams, Shaq Harris, Marlon Briscoe, and Warren Moon. Okay? So that was a great experience for me. And then full circle, 20 years later, 30 years later, I need their help because I just published this book. The first people I sent it to was Doug Williams and Shaq Harris.
And opening day of this past year's 2020 season, you had the most Black quarterbacks to start on their teams within the National Football League.
Exactly. So at the time, I was hoping to get this book out during the 100th anniversary. I was a little disappointed I wasn't ready for that. But the way things have moved and the way things have become, I guess, culturally woke, there's no better time to book than right now.
That's right.
That's perfect. It's
That's
perfect.
right. Well, sir, we can't wait to host you here at the most inspiring place on earth, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Labor Day weekend for the Black College Football Hall of Fame Classic, Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium, where it's going to be the Battle of the Tigers. Grambling State will take on Tennessee State. So we can't wait to have you here for that. Eddie George's first game as a head coach from the Ohio State. So we're going to change those Buckeye fans to Tiger fans, if you will.
Oh yeah, well you better get some more room for those Buckeye fans if they start coming out. That's for sure. They come out in the hundreds of thousands, man.
They sure do, and that's what we want. We want a packed house for this year's classic, sir. We can't wait to have you here.
I look forward to it. Can't wait. I hope to be there and try to let people know my goal for this book, Jameer, is to make sure every player that's playing college football in the HBCU has this book, so they can see that the history is on their side.
Well, that's going to do it right here for Mr. Clemons, Jameer Howerton on the mission. Thank you so much, sir. And we are in bounds.
Thank you very much. Me too.